And welcome back to the show. Week 4, John Iadarola still here, managing to keep it going against all odds. As you might have noticed, still no name for the show. Turns out I cannot commit to it, but we'll get that sorted out in the next couple of weeks, I hope. But anyway, we got some great stories today. We've got a couple of serious stories, or at least serious threats to our values in any event. We've also got some fun stories, including some international news that's kind of ridiculous from both Iceland and Japan. So that's going to be tons of fun. And yeah, like a nice mix of serious and not serious. We also, by the way, have another weekly roundup where I respond to your Twitter comments. That's always fun. I love hearing from you guys, so we'll get to that last. But first, we're going to be starting off with the serious news. So let's get his name right. Mark Pocan is a Democratic congressman I hadn't previously heard about, but he's working with Keith Ellison, who you have probably heard about, and they have a very interesting idea that they're working on. They want to enshrine in the Constitution an amendment that would grant a positive right to vote. Now you might think, don't we already have the right to vote in the Constitution? Not so much, really. We do have a couple of restrictions on the sorts of ways that voting can be infringed upon, and they've previously worked on things like civil rights and things like that to make sure that people can vote to some extent. But that's always sort of reactionary. One side tries to take away voting rights, and then another side does something to restore them. So what they want to do is get out in front of these different legal challenges to voting that we see almost every election now. So I'll give Mark Pocan a chance to talk about what he's working on here. He says, essentially what it would do is it would put the burden on any of the states that try to make laws that are more restrictive than they would have to prove that they're not disenfranchising a voter, rather than currently where a voter has to prove they've somehow been wronged by a state measure. And so that, I think, is very interesting. Now, the problem here is that when you try to fight against these restrictions on voting, you're often on your own. Maybe you have an organizational step in and try to lend some support to you, but it's your own sort of battle. Whereas the opposition to voting and those who are trying to take away voting rights, who have a ton of money, by the way, often these are rich individuals or organizations who are working across the country in multiple states at the same time to take away these voting rights. And so I think it's very important to take away the burden on the individuals who are trying to make sure that they actually can exercise their freedoms and their rights to vote, and to do something proactive. And so I like that they're working on this. And they talk about sort of the political impetus for this, why this is necessary. This is Pocan as well. He says, I think there are a number of folks, most likely on the right, who are looking at when we have larger turnout elections generally. I think they realize that they don't have much control over the election. Trying to control who goes to vote is just another strategy in trying to have an electoral outcome. And that's the reason. It's not like some kind of mystery what's leading to this. We understand the significance behind the need for an amendment like this. We understand who is assaulting voting rights. It's not even. It's not like 1 year it's the Democrats, 1 year it's the Republicans, and they take turns. It's not like in Massachusetts the Democrats are fighting against voting rights and the Republicans are really they're on the prowl in Utah. No, this is conservatives all over the country. There have been a couple of prominent quotes from high up right-wingers. You've probably heard them before about how they don't want more people to vote. So I'm not going to replay those for you now. But you understand what's going on. You understand that every electoral cycle there's going to be there's a lot of interest in the election this year. So Republicans are going to vote on Tuesday and Democrats are going to vote on Wednesday to make sure that everyone has time to vote. That happens every single time. You see the massive billboards saying, if you have parking tickets or something, they're going to be checking when you go to vote, so you don't want to go then. And it's reprehensible because this is supposed to be the strength of our country, that we have, we were one of the first and one of the best in terms of popular democracies where everybody is allowed to get involved once we got past the whole slavery thing. And that's what we want in this country. And it's even worse, I think, that it's not just they're trying to do whatever they can to stop Democrats from voting. It's difficult in general, I think, to stop Democrats from voting specifically. But they target the elderly, they target the poor, they target minorities. We know that that's the strategy. And so I love that Mark Pocan and Keith Ellison are working on this. Now, even they admit they have no idea how far this is going to go. I mean, they're just two congressmen right now. They're trying to rally support, and it seems to make some sense, but it's extremely hard to amend the Constitution. Now, I would say I don't know the exact provisions that will be in this, but one thing that's just frustrating to me is that we had the period where we had a Democratic president and we had Democratic majority control of both the Senate and the House of Representatives. And the fact that they weren't able to pass a law making the voting day a national holiday. That just blew my mind because it seems like such an obvious, both good thing just in terms of our values as favoring democracy, as wanting people to be involved, but also politically, for the Democrats' point of view, it seems like a great thing to have those who might not, because of their work environment, be able to get the time off to vote, give them a little bit more time. And it just makes sense from a practical point of view because we've seen how long the lines in some urban voting centers are. So I like that they're working on this. We don't know yet if it will pass, but we'll certainly be watching for that. I think in advance of the next election, something like this is definitely necessary, and so kudos to those two congressmen. So that's some good news to start you off. We also have a Republican congressman making news. It's not quite as good. So we're going to turn next to our old buddy, Louie Gohmert. Louie Gohmert is a congressman from Texas, and recently he was sitting in on a hearing at the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice, where there is currently a push going on for a nationwide 20-week ban on abortion. So they had speakers come in to talk about their views. One was a woman named Christy Zink. She was testifying. This is what she said. She was talking about how that bill would have required her to carry to term and give birth to a baby whom the doctors concurred had no chance of a life and would have experienced near constant pain. So what she's talking about there is that sometimes the reason for an abortion is not simply the choice of a woman, as Republicans might like to frame it, but the babies that they're carrying to term have no viability. They can be brought to term, they can be given birth to, but they don't have any brain activity. Maybe they have massive health problems and would not survive after giving birth. Now that seems like the sort of thing that even if you're, just a hard pro-life person, that would, I think, make you think twice a little bit. You might still keep your position, but it would inspire some compassion in you. But not if you're Louie Gohmert, it turns out. So he responded to what Christy Zink was saying with this. I apologize, this is kind of a long quote, but I want you to have the entire context. He says, "Being there in a neonatal ICU, I did see that there was one child there that was missing parts, including a spine." Parts. That seems like an important part. But he says, "And the parents ended up, when it was clear that there was no brain activity whatsoever, there was decisions that they had to make at that point. Mrs. Zink, having my great sympathy and empathy both, I still come back wondering, shouldn't we wait, like that couple did, and see if the child can survive before we decide to rip him apart? So these are ethical issues, they're moral issues, they're difficult issues, and the parents should certainly be consulted. But it just seems like it's a more educated decision if the child is in front of you to make those decisions." No, see, that's not actually what's going on. It's not a decision because you're taking away the decision by banning abortion after 20 weeks. There you're saying, we'll let you make a decision at some point after the baby's already born, after it's illegal to have any sort of abortion. It's trying to appeal to, I guess, the reasonable person out there who's not really sure if they're pro or against abortion and talking about making decisions. But don't let that cloud your judgment. Don't let that fool you. He's talking about taking away the decision. This ban, if it was able to go into effect, would be draconian. Nationwide, 20 weeks, that's all you get. Now, look, I'm no expert on abortion. I don't know biologically what time is right to make that determination. I don't know ethically what line we should draw there. The line should be somewhere, I understand that, but I don't feel qualified to say exactly what week it makes sense to do that. But I also understand at the same time, Louie Gohmert knows no more about when the biological or ethical line should be drawn. This is a man who, from his past experiences, his past statements, doesn't seem fit to govern his own Netflix instant queue, let alone the legality and morality of abortion. What we're talking about here, what Christy Zink was talking about, is an infant who possibly has no brain function aside from the pain that they're experiencing, a mother who's experiencing both physical and emotional trauma that I, as a male and as young as I am, not having gone through this, can't hope to understand, but I can at least speculate that it's horrifying. It's one of the worst things that you can go through. As I said, I can't give any sort of legal or moral expertise on this, but I can at least give compassion. I can give empathy. And he can mention empathy in his statement, but you understand that he's not actually giving it there. He's there for a political reason, and he's not going to allow the suffering of a woman to slow him down. Louie Gohmert, thankfully, as extreme as he is on many issues, is also so clearly an idiot whenever he opens his mouth that I don't think we have to worry about him holding any sort of national office. Perhaps if some other more intelligent right-winger becomes president someday, he'll get a cabinet position or something like that. But until then, I don't think we have to worry too much about him. Now, this is an important issue that we're talking about here. Louie Gohmert, thankfully, is not the only politician that's working on it. But we need intelligent, wise people. That word gets thrown around, but we need people with wisdom working on this. Louie Gohmert is not that man. Another person lacking in wisdom, slightly easier on the eyes, but that's about it. Let's turn to Fox News, Andrea Tantaros. Andrea Tantaros, who apparently has a radio show, I hadn't previously been aware of that, you might know her more popularly from The Five, was talking to her listeners about the AP scandal, specifically the investigation into James Rosen. Now, before we tell you what she was saying that's so deplorable, I will say that, yes, I don't like any of this investigation into what these different reporters, and in particular, the Fox News journalist was doing. I think that that's totally wrong. But thankfully, we're not going to have to focus on that because Andrea Tantaros is going to say something crazy that I think is actually more offensive, possibly, because we all understand that the surveillance is going on. That's not shocking anyone at this point. So she was talking on her radio program about this and about how this is just a natural consequence of Obama coming into office and fundamentally changing the country. And she has a recommendation for what her viewers should do. Let's listen.
This is Obama's America. It's like the Soviet Union. He said he changed the country. He said it. He said it. He said it. And a lot of people voted for him. And if you see any of those people today, do me a favor, punch them in the face. We'll be right back.
So there, the reasonable assessing of the situation that you've come to expect from members of The Five, there on her radio show, Andrea Tantaros. Now, look, I understand she's a journalist. She should be afforded some respect. I've done some research into her past. She has an actually interesting past in terms of what she was able to accomplish. We should bear in mind, though, this is the woman who did not know why the Revolutionary War was fought and was stumped live on TV when asked about it. But yeah, she is advocating for violence there. I understand it's hyperbole, it's a joke. I understand that. Not going to down on her too much. The violence inherent in that statement is actually not why I find it so interesting. It's the desperation. Now, I've talked about this previously on the show when talking about both the IRS scandal, the AP scandal, Benghazi to some extent. These scandals are coming up, and all of them, to one degree or another, does reflect poorly on the administration, if not the president directly. Things have gone on that should not have gone on. They should not be seizing the phone records of these journalists. They should not be investigating them. The IRS investigation of the conservative groups also went too far in some instances. But as much as I am saying I actually do care to some extent about these scandals, the right-wingers do not care whatsoever about the specifics. They should, but they don't. And the reason that I know that is they are so quick to try to turn it into nothing more than a tool to attack the president. So really, it's business as usual for them. This stuff is going on that actually is bad and should make us question the extent of executive power as it's been employed in both the IRS and the AP scandals. But Andrea Tantaros isn't interested in that. She's interested in one thing, and that's turning this scandal into a tool to do maximum damage to the president. I would be more worried if it wasn't so obvious. I don't think that anyone's really fooled at this point. They understand that Benghazi is about one person only, and that's Hillary Clinton. They're trying to take her down in advance of a run in 2016. And the AP and the IRS, they were so quick to turn around and throw the impeachment term out there that I don't think they're really fooling anyone as to what their goal actually is. So this was a little look into what goes on her radio show. I assume you don't watch it or listen to it. I wouldn't advise that you do. But if you do, understand that this is what you're going to get. She's going to be unreined from whatever small amount of control they have over her and the other people on the Five. Once you get on the radio, you expect violence, you expect hyperbole, and that's what you get in this case. As I alluded to before talking about the program, very attractive woman. I wouldn't mind meeting her at some point, but not exactly the most intelligent person in the room, unfortunately. But let's move on to, thankfully, a bit of a success for the liberal cause, I guess, at least on one issue, and the totally expected counterpunch. So last week, the Boy Scouts made a massive change to their policies, allowing for the first time openly gay scouts, but not scoutmasters. Still, it's a victory. We'll take what we can get for now. Maybe in a couple of years we can expand that to the Scoutmasters. But you won't be surprised that some right-wingers did not take this news as a great success. And they lashed out on Twitter, as has become so popular for both the left and the right. Whenever you feel something strongly, you got to try to get those retweets and followers. So we're going to be profiling, this is coming, by the way, from, I believe this is Mediaite, 5 of the most hyperbolic and overblown responses to the Boy Scout policy change. First, Eric Erickson, now he's a blogger at Red State, and he had to say, "Yes, Christ is love, but he is also wrath, vengeance, and redemption. The modern emo Christ is a fiction. Christ could throw a punch." Now, God, at least in the Old Testament and some parts of the New Testament, certainly did fit the description here. He could throw a punch. He could wipe out entire populations. He could turn people to, pillars of salt and all that. Christ, though, he did throw the money changers out, but he seemed much more about turning the other cheek. I love that, when, we have fifth hand people talking about what Christ said, that they're so sure that, hates gays, all that. Yeah, totally hates gays. Hates abortion, even though it's never mentioned. They're so sure of that. But when we have actual, second-hand statements from Jesus Christ on the Sermon on the Mount, I can't hear what you're saying. I have no idea what you're talking about. Turn the other cheek? No, I should get another Magnum. But anyway, this is a weird, look into their view of Christianity. We often attack this side of Christianity, and some reasonable Christians will say, well, you're being unfair, because that's not all of what Christianity is. It's not all homophobia. It's not all hating outsiders and Muslims and things like that. There's more to it. Not if you're Eric Erickson. So he's having none of this emo Christ who's, accepting of people. He wants to punch gay scouts in the face, apparently. Let's move on to Tony Perkins. You might know him from the Family Research Council, very outspoken, writes books on all that. He decided to say, Boy Scouts' decision, another casualty of moral compromise. I guess that's actually factually correct to some extent. This is a moral compromise, since we think that the Scout Masters should also be allowed to be gay. We didn't get that. So this is technically a compromise. But this isn't a casualty of moral compromise. This is the Boy Scouts of America being slowly dragged into the modern day and into a modern view of homosexuality. That's really all it is. That's why we say that it's a victory, albeit not a complete one. Tony Perkins, I apologize. You'll be okay. You can still have homophobic Scoutmasters. So you've got that going for you. Let's move on to Matt Barber. He's from Right Wing Watch, which you might be familiar with. He said, Boy Scouts of America, born February 8, 1910, died May 23rd, 2013. Rest in peace. Twitter, I totally understand, is the area where hyperbole sells. People want to retweet that shit. He got 12 retweets, 3 favorites. That's not bad. Maybe not as much as he was hoping for, but, he's not Tony Perkins. What can you expect? But yeah, it's dead. It's dead. That seems to imply that the only reason that the Boy Scouts of America existed in the first place was to provide a venue for young boys to race those little miniature cars and whittle free from the homosexual scourge. And now that they can also have homosexual kids there, what's the point? Look, I was never a Boy Scout. My brother was. I was never involved in that lifestyle. And if you're looking for someone to provide a defense for why we need Boy Scouts in America, I'm probably not the person to go to. But I would like to imagine that the learning discipline or respect for tradition or how to make a fire, that still holds value, even if it's a straight child and a homosexual child doing it at the same time. That's just my view. Let's move on to Todd Starnes of Fox News Radio, one of their hosts. He says, Boy Scouts of America votes to sexualize scouting. This is one of the 5 tweets that I wanted to focus on the most because it's such a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually happened last week. The problem was when you ban homosexual scouts from being involved in the Boy Scouts, that's sexualizing the scouts. That's saying that your acceptance and your admittance into this organization is dependent on who you love and who you want to have sex with. Hadn't previously been the case. It didn't need to be the case. Now we're saying you cannot discriminate based on who someone wants to have sex with. You no longer even need to think about it. Doesn't have to be on your mind. Doesn't have to be in your pamphlets or on your website or anything like that. No concern whatsoever for who these children want to have sex with. That's the desexualizing of the Boy Scouts, you moron. Yeah. He got 15 retweets off of that, by the way. Not bad, again. More than I get for most of my stuff. By the way, to go back, Eric Erickson's got 82. That's more than like anything I've ever tweeted. So there is an audience for this sort of hate speech. Brian Fisher, by the way, who we've talked about in the Young Turks before, he is a talk radio host. He's involved in one of those hateful Christian organizations. He said, BSA now stands for Boy Sodomizers of America, because that's what will happen. Mark my words. Getting the most out of his 140 characters there. He can't go a week without saying something horrible, and we spotlight him only to remind you that there are awful old white Christians in this country who like nothing more than to discriminate against homosexuals. But once again, as is so often the case, when somebody is speaking out against homosexuality this fervently and this often, it seems like the only natural conclusion to make is that he is obviously gay himself. And I'm going to tell you why based on his 140 characters. That's what will happen. Now that they're allowed in, there has to be sodomy. Now, when I heard that they were allowing homosexual children into this organization, I thought, oh good, they don't need to be discriminated against. They can go whittle or learn how to row a canoe or something. That seems like what they do. But he immediately leaps to the sodomy. He couldn't go one day to just say, well, you know, this is too bad as a Christian. Didn't like that group. No. Immediately, his mind leaps to young boys sodomizing each other. This is so often what we see. I don't think that it's a coincidence. I think that to be opposed to this sort of just being involved in the fucking Boy Scouts, you have to have some sort of vested interest. And I think that in this case, at least in terms of Brian Fisher, the vested interest is not wanting to come to grips with his own identity as a homosexual that he is apparently, since he looks like he's probably 70, 80 years old, he has been holding within deeply for a very long time. But now that the Boy Scouts allow homosexual students, perhaps someday the love and compassion coming from these Boy Scouts can whittle through your hard exterior, Brian Fisher, and have you come to grips with the sort of person you actually are. So a day of victory for liberals, a day of victory for homosexuals in America. Still more work to be done. Don't let these crazy tweets stop you. So we're going to take a very short break. We're going to come back. We've got some more lighthearted, some more fun stories. Nothing but fun from here on out. And welcome back to the second half of the show. We've got some lighter, some more fun stories for you. We're going to be starting off with a little bit of international news. We've got two stories from around the globe that should be nothing but fun to some extent, you know, in the context of this show anyway. So let's get started with those last few stories. There's a campaign ongoing in Iceland right now to completely ban internet porn, no exceptions. As you might guess, I'm against this, but I'm going to play devil's advocate and give you some of the reasons that they're thinking about doing this. First, Iceland is actually a pretty interesting example of countries in the EU. So they apparently have, by various measures, the largest gender gap in their society between men and women, which is actually pretty interesting, and I certainly wouldn't have expected it. And perhaps as a result of this, there's an interesting number of pieces of legislation trying to take away some of that gap. So distributing porn has been illegal in Iceland from as far back as 1869, I'm reading here. This is a report in The Guardian. That's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't know exactly how high quality porn was 150 years ago. Maybe it wasn't worth distributing. But at least for the last 30, 40 years since Playboy and Hustler and all that, it seems like you'd want to distribute that sort of thing. And so if they've been able to actually stop that, you know, kudos to them. That's some pretty hardcore stuff, literally. Finally, or I should say also, they made a very interesting move, and it's pretty innovative actually. So sex workers typically doing that sort of behavior in many countries in the world is illegal, and if you try to sell sex, you can be arrested. But they instead decided to target sex buyers. Now, there are occasionally stings even in America, but having that as the central tenet of your strategy to stop sex work is a little bit different, and perhaps more understanding of the women trying to make ends meet, I guess. And finally, this was back in 2009, and finally in 2010 they banned strip clubs. And so, I mean, regular pornography is also already illegal. Prostitution, stripping even. I guess internet porn is kind of a natural extension of that, and they give some reasons why. So they feel like, and this is one of the common refrains that's often given against internet porn, that it makes women feel inferior or makes them feel pressured into doing certain sexual acts. We've certainly heard this argument before. I'm going to give a quote, actually. This is from Guðrún Jónsdóttir, a spokeswoman, I should say, for Stigmat, one of the centers that helps victims of sexual abuse in Iceland, says, "Why should we allow unfettered misogyny, images of rape? The argument is that we need to ban porn because it hurts our children, and that is true, but it also needs to be stopped because it is hate speech and violence against women and affects people's relationships." So that's throwing out a lot of reasons that she's opposed to internet porn. Many of the common ones that we hear even in America when people like Rick Santorum talk about wanting to have a war on pornography. Now, I don't doubt that some women do feel pressured into looking a certain way or acting a certain way because of what they see in online porn. I should also note that sexualized advertisements are also very rare in Iceland. So, they're not showing the American Apparel ads, I guess. And so this might seem like a natural extension of that. And they're also saying that it has effects on relationships. I actually am somewhat sympathetic to that argument. I think that the sort of pornography, I apologize, and the way that it's consumed is probably having some psychological effect on men, if not women. But giving all of those arguments and understanding where they're coming from on that, I still think that it's a bad idea. I think that it's a losing cause in terms of the technology. I think that it's almost impossible to do. Now, what they would do is they would ban IPs, they would ban certain websites, and they would also make it illegal to use Icelandic credit cards to pay for online porn. Now, the percentage of porn that's actually being paid for is probably a very small amount. And it just seems like we are in a world where this information is available. There are only a few countries that really try to ban this sort of stuff. Actually, one student in this says, China and North Korea ban these things. Does Iceland really want to be like those countries? And I don't think that it does. I understand that that you need to protect the women and to some extent the men who are consuming this pornography, but I think there are other ways that you can do that. Education campaigns and things like that. You should certainly work to close this gender gap that they have in this country. But I think that it's just against human nature to ban pornography. We've had pornography since we had self-expression, since we had art. People were drawing naked bodies. And it seems like just because it's online, and it might be a little bit easier in some cases to track, it doesn't make it a wise move for Iceland. I think that you're fighting against the flow of progress. I think that it's against human nature. I don't think that it'll work long term. But I am interested to hear what you guys think about that. Like I said, I understand some of the arguments against pornography. I just think that it's a losing battle, even in Iceland. Let's move to Japan, though. When you think of excess, particularly when you think of food excess, you think of America. We love to make food bigger, greasier, more fried, nastier. You had the double down at KFC. We have waffle hamburgers and things like that. Like anything you can think of, we will make it in America. But Japan, it turns out, also starting to like the excess when it comes to food. I'm referring here to the debut of the Mega Potato. Now that is an extremely large serving of French fries in one container that McDonald's in Japan is going to start serving soon. Now, for statistics' sake, it's 350 grams of potatoes, and it has 1,152 calories for under $5, which is quite a value, actually. Now, if you've been paying attention to BuzzFeed and things like that, you probably remember a couple of months ago when we saw that Japan was holding French fry parties where a bunch of usually young people would go into McDonald's and buy as many French fries as they can because they're so cheap there and have just this massive tray of French fries. Now, there are a couple of explanations for why they might like to do that. Part of it is they want to feel like they can afford as much excess as in Western countries or like the US or something like that. Maybe it's just, tastes good. And they certainly do. I love those French fries. Now, there's nothing wrong with making the Mega Potato, I guess. And certainly, if there is an obesity epidemic in Japan, I haven't heard about it. although it is the influx of Western foods like McDonald's that tends to lead to that in a lot of countries. And we certainly see that when families come from other countries and live in America, within 1 or 2 generations are just as fat as the rest of us, perhaps because of things like the mega potato. And so Japan, which has typically had a very healthy diet, at least in terms of what I know about it, it's unfortunate that they might be moving in this direction. Certainly free to. I'm not saying that they're not. I expect that if this is a success in Japan, it will almost certainly come to America. It's amazing that we haven't seen a larger size. I remember back in the day, God, over 10 years ago, there was the mega sizing in America, and as a child, I thought that this was amazing. And so when I had money to go and shop at McDonald's, I would always mega size while it was available. But it's certainly not healthy. I think that making these sizes available, while certainly legal, I think that it warps our perception of how much food is normal to eat. Because if that's the very large, then I guess a large is more reasonable. When really, even a small is a lot of greasy, nasty French fries to be eating. So Japan should probably think twice about this. They can do whatever they want. I assume that it will be a success because of their French fry party culture. Anyway, it's just another area where Japan is innovating in very weird ways. So let's move back to America. Big tech juggernaut about to be released. We have to worry about the legal implications. Google Glass is coming at some point this year, we expect, and every week it seems like there's another legal challenge to it. And now we have one that might be coming soon. Lambda Labs is it's a startup, it's a tech company in the San Francisco area that develops facial recognition APIs for different products. And they've announced that they've come up with one that works for Google Glass. So, you know, the initial developer copies of it have been sent out and people have been testing it and working on it in different ways. And this is just the natural consequence of that, I guess. And so a lot of people are worried now about the privacy invasion of things like facial recognition. Now, what you should understand is that Google Glass is not augmented reality. It's not like those programs that you can get on your phone where it overlays text and information over images or video. That's not how it works. So it's unlikely, and this API does not even allow for real-time identification of people or their social networking information or anything like that. But you can take a picture and send it to them, they analyze it, and then they send it back to you. Now, I guess with a fast enough internet connection, that could be a pretty quick turnaround, but it's nothing like the Terminator walking around and seeing the red HUD overlay or anything like that. But that said, while we have Lambda Labs coming out with their API before it's even released, is it that big of a leap to imagine that within 6 months or a year, more real-time facial recognition could be developed? I don't think that that's out of the bounds of reason. It certainly could happen. Now, Steve Lee is the director of project management for Google Glass. He says, "We've consistently said that we won't add new facial recognition features to our services unless we have strong privacy protections in place." Now, that is a PR statement meant to say, look, don't worry, if you guys go crazy about this, and if it's actually illegal in any way, we're going to stop it from happening to the extent that we can. But if it turns out that people want it, and it is legal, who knows? Maybe we'll add it. And understand that these products, all these products, can be at some point jailbroken. So even if Google tries to stop this sort of API from being available and doesn't have it in their app store or whatever it is that they end up having, the possibility that somebody could load it onto it is certainly real. It could certainly happen. Now, I don't know that this is the end of the world. I think that it's easy to imagine, something like Reddit creep shots is going to develop around people wearing Google Glass. And I certainly expect that that will happen. But, I mean, this is the world that we're living in. We go out there and there are more cameras. Our privacy pretty much ends, I guess at our front door. And with the new Xbox One, you don't even have it in your living room anymore. I actually kind of like the Xbox One, but I had to make the joke. I don't think that this is the end of the world. We just have to redefine, I guess, our expectations for privacy and what privacy really means. And in a world where we're so willingly giving out all of our information on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and things like that, how much privacy can we really expect? And understand that if these facial recognition programs are doing anything, they're linking up to your social media where pictures of you are freely available. If you really, at the end of the day, want privacy, don't put those pictures of yourself online. And then you only have to worry, I guess, about police databases or something like that. That actually does worry me a little bit. Anyway, can't go a week without talking about Google Glass. Can't say that damn word. The Glass is coming. I will be purchasing it, so I'm excited for that. But let's turn to a little bit of community interaction. It's time for another week of the weekly roundup where I respond to some of your Twitter comments, Facebook comments, YouTube messages that I've gotten on my channel. I love hearing from you guys, and this is a chance to talk back in a more public way than just retweeting you, I guess. So the first is coming from Andrew. This is God Emperor Leto. He says, "First woman who? Hillary would be garbage. She's a true politician like the rest. Now, if Elizabeth Warren ran..." Now, this was when I was discussing possible 2016 nominees, I guess. He's not a fan of Hillary. I understand that. During the last election, I was an Obama man, or I should say 2 elections, I guess. I didn't want President Hillary Clinton because she seemed too conservative. I imagine that if anything, she's even slightly more conservative now. I would prefer Elizabeth Warren, I guess, based on what I know now. When it comes to, the student loan bill that she has and different protections for consumers and things like that, I'm certainly more on her side. I love the rhetoric. I love the way she frames issues. She seems like a very smart woman. And she does, at this point, seem like a true liberal, although understand we don't know nearly as much about her as we do about Hillary Clinton. And maybe she'll run. Maybe during the primary contest we'll find out more. But we also have to bear in mind that we're not simply voting for Hillary, or whatever. It's in comparison to other people. We don't know who else is going to be running. Maybe somebody much more exciting will run. But until then, I have to say that if it's Hillary or a Republican, that's the 2-party system we've got. I'd vote Hillary. That's just my honest opinion. So I don't even know where this tweet came from, but Kevin, LAC in Michigan says, "Is there a double standard with guy on guy versus girl on girl public displays of affection? Can anything be done to nix the double standard?" I think that there is almost certainly a double standard for the vast majority of Americans and probably people around the world. Can anything be done to nix it? Yes, I think something can be done. I think that one of the reasons we're more okay with women on women public displays of affection is because we're more familiar with it. Certainly in pornography, but also at frat parties and things like that. I think also that lesbians feel more comfortable because of the social conditioning that they have to be more open about it. I think that almost naturally, both the male on male and female on female displays of affection will change over time. I think that as gay marriage is more and more legalized, we'll see it more. And that, I think, is the only thing stopping it from becoming more common. Anything is sort of jarring the first time you see it, but then you see it again and again and again, and eventually, I don't have to worry about that. I have to get to work. Like, I can't put any more thought into it. It's the same thing with, public nudity. Like, the first time you see it, yeah, it's pretty shocking, but if you see it every day, at some point you don't care anymore, which is why I think, toplessness laws, I think they're perfectly fine for people to be topless, because after a day or two, you don't care. And on the converse, actually, one of our graphics guys went to Iran for an extended period of time, and after a couple of weeks, he said, "Man, I'd see like an ankle and I'd think, ooh, ankle." So these things are malleable, and while I don't like that there's a double standard, I do understand it, but I do think over time it could change. Next, this is a new Twitter account that started that kind of weirded me out a little bit. It's Love John Iadarola, with the name Love for J. Iadarola. "We are now taking applications to date J. Iadarola." And the description is that they're trying to find the right person for me. Now, I think that they're unlikely to have much of an effect on my dating life since they have 9 subscribers so far. But thank you very much for trying to help. Understand that if I ever decide to get back in the dating game, I'm very busy. Don't have a lot of time for it. I actually love my work. It's both my work and my hobby. There's not a lot of time for it. I'll probably do the choosing myself. Although if you want to recommend people, who wouldn't want the help, I guess. Finally, Jeremy Effinger, this is Jeremy Effinger, says, "You play any MMOs these days? If not, got any in the future you're looking forward to?" And he also recommended EVE Online. I have played EVE Online in the past. Unfortunately, it was just too time consuming for me. And while I think it's interesting and I like the way that skills are leveled up and all that, it's just not a game that really stuck for me. Have I played any MMOs these days? I did try out Neverwinter. I also very briefly tried out Defiance. But unfortunately, I have to say at this point, I don't think my life is set up in a way that I can play MMOs. Any game that I play, I have to be able to get in and get out. Sometimes I make way for something like, Dead Island Riptide or Tomb Raider 2, or the new Tomb Raider, Borderlands 2. Something like that I can play in one day and then be done with. But in terms of things that I'm going to play multiple days in a row, I've already got League of Legends. It's very difficult to fit in another game. I miss the days of playing EverQuest and things like that. I did have a lot of fun with that, Lord of the Rings Online more recently, but those games just take over your life, and I just don't have time for it right now. So those are the comments from this week. If you'd like to be featured on a future weekly roundup, just feel free to tweet me. And if it's interesting, catches my eye, I'll include it. Love hearing from you guys. It's one of the most fun parts of my job. So anyway, that is, unfortunately, all the stories I've got for this week. I know the show is a little bit late. You know, we had the Memorial Day weekend, and unfortunately I had a lot of work built up that I had to get to first. But I love getting back in the studio to do these stories. They're stories that I don't often get to do on TYTU, the Common Room. Sometimes when I fill in on the main show, but then it's a panel, so it's a little bit different vibe. Anyway, those were all fun. If you have suggestions for things you'd like to see covered on the show, I'm always open for suggestions, mainly on Twitter, although of course you can comment on one of these videos on YouTube. And until then, I'll see you next week on another episode of my show.